Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 2 of our Lathe Duplicator build. Well, now that we have the base made and mounted on the lathe, you may be wondering what's next, and what's next is making the marker assembly. So the first piece that we need to make is the base, and this will be made out of 1/2-inch plywood, and all I've done is I've cut it to a dimension of 3 inches wide by 5 inches long, and I've used that same 1-inch diameter circle template, and I've rounded all 4 corners. The next piece that we're going to require is going to be the upright or the marker body. And for that, we're going to be using 3/4 inch plywood here. And I've cut this to a dimension of 5 3/4 inches wide by 6 1/8 inch long. And we have this section here is the 6 1/8. That's actually our height. That is the 5 3/4. So I'm going to mark this out, and the marking is going to go relatively quickly. Try to follow along and I'll see you at the end. The first line in the top right hand corner is going to be a mark at 2 3/4 inch. And we're also going to place another mark at 1 3/8. And then right in the corner here, we're just going to put a 1/2-inch diameter circle or a 1/4 inch radius in that corner. We're now going to come up from the bottom at 1.5 inches, just like this. We're going to come in from that bottom right corner at 2 3/8 inch. Placing a line here just like that, and we'll join these two together. And once again, with that 1/2-inch diameter circle template, we're going to round out this bottom corner here. Up from this bottom left corner, we're going to place a mark at 1 inch, and then we're going to come in 1.5 inches from this mark right here. So 1.5 inches right there, just like that. And now we're going to join this line to this line. We now need to drill the hole that will house our pencil, and that hole will be right down through here. Now the easiest way to do that is to drill from the bottom over at the drill press right through until we get past this line here, because this will be waste. We're going to cut this away. So I'm going to take this over to the drill press. I'm going to drill a 9/32 diameter hole from the bottom here all the way through till I pass this line, and it's going to be centered on the 3/4 plywood, but it's also going to be 11/32 inch in from the edge. The next piece of material that you're going to need will be a piece of aluminum flat bar. It'll be 1/8 inch thick, it'll be 1 inch wide, and 4 inches long. And we're just going to file this end to a point. And with the front end of this now sharpened to a point, we can install it in our marker assembly. I got a little bit ahead of myself and started to cut out this section, and then I stopped because I still need to cut the kerf that we're going to glue this piece of aluminum into. Now, all we're going to do is take it over to the table saw, and we're going to cut a lengthwise kerf right down the middle here, just thick enough to house this piece of aluminum. With that saw kerf done, we can now cut this section out, and we won't cut this yet until we've installed our aluminum bar. Well, I have the aluminum bar set in place in our kerf, and the way you want to align it is the tip of your point here is going to align with the center of the hole that you drilled. So get it lined up, and then we're going to drill 2 1/8 inch holes right through here, and I'm going to glue in a couple dowels to keep it in place. And we're now just going to take this over to the bandsaw, and I'm going to cut this corner piece off there. After that, there's nothing more to do than to mount it to our plywood base. So we'll drill a couple of pilot holes that coincide with the ones that we drill in our 1/2 inch thick plywood base, and we'll screw it together. Well, if you've been following along, you should have a base that looks like this. And you should also have one of these crazy contraptions right here, which is your marking assembly. And what this piece does is it allows you to make your templates of an original turning. I'm going to show you a little later how to use all of this stuff, so don't worry, it's all going to come together in the end. The next thing that we need to do is we really need to get our cutting handle or our cutting assembly made. But before we do that, I just want to show you the cutting tools that I'll be using for this. Well, although it's not necessary, I'm going to be using some of these Easy Wood tools. And these are turning tools. You may have seen them, you may not have. If not, you can look them up and check them out. But I'm going to be making the holder so it will hold these tools, kind of like this, but on a different type of handle assembly, but very similar to this. Now, you don't have to use these particular tools. You can just use the cutting tips, and that's something that you can get into and customize for your own jig. For now, though, what we need is we're going to put this marking assembly aside, and we need to get 2 pieces of 3/4 inch plywood that are going to be 4 3/4 by 5 3/4. Well, the very first thing that you need to do is we need to get these glued together so that we have a very thick piece, 1.5 inch thick piece of ply. And this is going to be the basis for our tool holder. So glue these together, clamp them up, set them aside, and then we can cut the base for the tool holder. Well, here we have the plywood for our base, and it measures 1/2 inch thick, and it's 5.5 by 7.5. And just like our other parts, there's layout that has to be done. I will try my best to explain it, but if you follow with the measurements that I give you as we go along, you should have no problems marking out your own base. Our first mark from the bottom here will be at 2.5 inches. Our next mark here will be at 1.5 inches up from the bottom, and another mark at 1 inch. We're then going to measure in from the right hand edge here 3/4 of an inch, and we're just going to put a little tick right there and another one down here at the bottom at 3/4 of an inch in from the edge, and then we're going to join these lines together. We're then going to rotate our piece 90 degrees just like that, and we're going to place a mark here at 2.25 inches in the top right corner. Our next mark will be placed on this line here actually, and we're going to measure in and mark it at 4 inches. And then much like we've done here at this side, we're going to join those 2 points together. The next marks that we require on this base will actually be for mounting holes to mount the handle to the base. So we're going to come in from our left side here while we have this in this configuration. We're going to come in 1.25 inches on this left side, and as well from the top we're going to come in 1.25 inches. Our next mark will be from this left edge here 7/8 of an inch up, just like that, and then 4 3/8 of an inch from this end. 4 3/8 right there. There's another mounting hole, and the last one that we need will be 1 5/8 of an inch in from this left side. There it is. And from this end here, it's going to be at 5 1/8. So we'll just line up with that line and put a mark at 5 1/8. And those are our 3 mounting holes, 1, 2, and 3. The next mark will be for a hole for a control knob or basically a knob to help us hold on to things. And that will be from this back edge 1¼ inches. We'll just mark it there. And from this edge here, we'll put a mark at 1 1/8. And that will be our knob mounting position. And the last thing that we need to do is we're going to take our circle template. We're going to use a 1/2 inch diameter circle and round off each one of these corners. Once we get that done, we can pretty much take it over to the scroll saw and cut out the perimeter. The next step will be to drill these 4 holes, 3 for mounting our tool holder and 1 for our control knob. Now, depending on what type of knob you use, that will dictate what size hole you drill here. The mounting screws that we're going to be using are going to be number 8 by 1.5 inch screws, so you can drill those holes accordingly and countersink the bottom so that the screws will sit flush once the tool holder gets mounted. All of our holes are drilled and countersunk on the bottom. I've also turned a knob, a jig knob, out of ABS. I'm sure you guys have seen me work with that stuff before, but I've turned a jig knob and that will get mounted right there once I get this through the acetone chamber to give it a better finish. We're going to put this aside for now because this is pretty much done, and we're going to go back to our laminated piece of 1.5 inch thick plywood. Our laminated plywood is dry, and we now have our piece here that, as I've said before, is 4 3/4 by 5 3/4. And we're going to start some of the layout. Once again, I'll just go through it, and if you follow along exactly as I say, you should have no problems whatsoever. The first line that we need is going to be a line that is 1 inch down from the top, just like that, and we're going to come in 1/2 inch all the way to the bottom. Once we get that done, we're going to round this off with a 1/2 inch diameter circle template. Our next line from this right hand side here will be 1 7/8 inch. We'll start about 1/3 of the way down and drag it all the way to the bottom. This will be the thickness of the piece that is going to hold your next piece of aluminum. If you want to check to make sure that you've done it correctly, this piece right here that we just measured out should be 1 3/8 inch across. From this top right corner now, going across to the left, we're going to place a mark at 3.5 inches. And once we get that mark done, we're going to join it up with this bottom corner. We will now measure from this line that we just drew 1 1/4 inches out, both at the top and the bottom, and we'll draw a connecting line here. And from the bottom to join this gap right here, we're going to draw a line rather at 3.5 inches up from the bottom. And then using a 3/4 circle template, we're just going to finish off the inside edges to connect everything together and soften it up a bit. You now need to place a mark for your jig knob, and you want it centered on this 1 3/8 inch wide pillar, and we're going to bring it 5/8 inch up from the bottom. And if you've been following the measurements, that'll be at 1 3/16 will be at center, and as I said, 5/8 from the bottom. And you can give that one a center punch because we will be putting in a threaded insert into that hole. And that would be the marking pretty much for our handle of our cutter. The next thing we need to do is we need to cut a groove in the top of this piece. Now it needs to house the cutter of our easy tool, and in this case it's a 3/8 by 3/8 bar. We don't want it the full depth of the 3/8 because we need this chisel to be a little proud of the top of our tool rest. So we're going to make it 3/8 of an inch wide, centered on top of here, and we're going to make it a little less, I'd say a 1/16 less than our 3/8 here. When I'm looking at what I've got, I may need to alter this design to allow for the handle of this chisel, but that's something we can deal with after. For now, let's get that slot cut. Our slot is now cut, or our dado or groove or whatever you want to call it is now cut for our chisel, and we now need to get a groove cut in this bottom section just here. We're going to use the table saw, which is a little tricky, but we're just going to run it through and stop it once it's past this point. And we're going to cut a groove that's going to house another piece of aluminum bar that will be 1/8 inch thick by 1 inch wide. And unfortunately, guys, that's all the time we have for this week. Who would have thought it would have gone into a 3-part series, but that's okay. I'd rather extend it an extra part and provide all the information than cut you short on information just to back off on the parts. Guys, we've made some great progress. It's been a lot of fun up until now, and we're going to continue the fun next week when we finish off the build. I hope you're going to join me for yet another woodworking video.